SEC starts. A lot more conference play now. Peter Burns, the SEC Network, joins me. I'm Ryan Brown. Welcome in, Burnsy. How are you today?
I'm doing better than Chris Doring was this morning on our show. Like he was like had the case of the SEC Mondays where he was like, we all suck, we're terrible. The Pac-12 is better than us, the ACC better than us. Like we were gonna have to fold as a conference. Like so I talked him off the ledge, but we're doing all right. We're live. Yeah. We're talking college football. It could be worse things to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Could be worse things to do. There's no doubt about that. Of course, the Burnout presented by MyBookie.ag. Code next round. When you sign up at MyBookie.ag to get that sign-on bonus, plus get a chip for a limited time to that MyBookie casino right now. They've got the parlay deal. You play a 3-leg parlay. You hit those first 2 legs. You don't want to sweat out a San Jose State late-night game. You cash that thing out and use it again. MyBookie.ag. Code next round for that sign-on bonus. MyBookie.ag. Code next round. All right, let's start right off the top. Topic number 1.
Missouri football. Let's talk about Missouri. I know everybody's it's the big topic. I mean, it's leading Get Up at Sports Center. It's Vanderbilt losing to Wake. We can dive into it. Eastern Kentucky, giving Kentucky a run for their money. I mean, I know the leads.
Yeah, I don't see any of those right there. Can we panic now? We weren't going to panic last week when it was just North Carolina beating South Carolina and LSU didn't look good against Florida State, and Florida lost Utah. We weren't going to panic because Alabama, they would save the conference next week. They're going to beat Texas, and the world will be right. And Texas A&M, they're going to go down, and they're going to beat Miami, and everybody will shut up about how the SEC is playing in all these non-conference games. And all of a sudden, none of those things have happened.
Yeah, it's almost like, hey, all of a sudden you're at recess and you start getting picked on. You're like, just wait till my big brother gets here. Like you are going to you'll have to deal with my big brother once he gets here. And then Alabama shows up and then Texas just punches them right in the mouth. And I think that was the craziest part about the whole situation, Brownie, was that it felt like Alabama got out Alabama'd in that game, right? Like it was everything that we've come to understand Nick Saban football to be, which is multiple, really good defense in your face, making teams want to quit. That's what Texas did to Alabama in T-Town. I think that's why everybody was so shocked by it. It's been a decade of underperforming for Texas, and for them to give, Alabama a run for their money last year, where I think it kind of came out of, not nowhere, but I think a lot of fans were like, all right, it's Texas, we're Bama, here it is. But I think, every Alabama fan, Texas had their attention this year, and they're like, all right, we're just going to take it to you. We're going to make your ass quit. And that's rarely the case when I see, against a Nick Saban-led team, especially at home.
So a lot of people point back to 2015. Alabama loses game 3 to Ole Miss, Hugh Freeze and Ole Miss. Alabama turned it over 5 times. It was this weird game, Peter. It was a late-night ESPN kick. I think the scheduled kick time was 8:30. And there was a delay, of course, game before it and all that. I don't think it kicked till like 8:45, 9 o'clock. So it went deep into the night. The game lasted forever. Crazy plays. Bama turned it over 5 times. They lost in that game. There were quarterback questions, and Alabama started Cooper Bateman. And he did not perform well, so they go to Jake Coker. You know the rest of the story. Coker takes over, and they wouldn't lose again, and they win a national championship. So there are a lot of Alabama fans that point back to that, but then they also in the same breath say this just does not feel the same. Now, I would suggest maybe that's because this team doesn't have Derrick Henry and that one did, but why would this not feel the same as 2015 for Alabama?
I'm not saying it feels vaguely the same. And I think the difference is I go back and look at every single one of those Alabama losses, and it's crazy. Like Alabama has been so good under Saban. You legitimately can go, remember that loss, like because it cuts through, right? Like it's monumental when you see Alabama lose. But I think when you go back and look at how they've lost in the past, whether it's 2015, I don't know, was that Chad Kelly? Like I don't remember, or Bo Wallace. I can't remember.
Chad Kelly,
the quarterback was. It always seemed like there was this like unbelievable quarterback play and quirky stuff that happened. And Manziel just, caught the fumble and threw a touchdown. Like all this random stuff happens. But like the reason why 2015 seems a little different than this year is that was just Texas coming out there and forcing their will upon Alabama. Like there was no like, oh, this is just luck, or they got some, a lucky tip ball here and there. Like Texas dominated them in pretty much all facets. I mean, was there a facet of the game, Brownie, when you looked at it that you said, if I had to give, if I was scoring in boxing, that I gave the round towards Alabama in any position group, I don't know if there was, including coaching, right? I mean, like, that's crazy to me that they were whipped on every single side of that matchup. So that's the only reason why I have a little bit of pause of saying it's 2015. Now, there is the Chicken Little aspect of it, of, oh my God, the dynasty's over and blah, blah, blah. You're going to get that. It's Chicken Little. I mean, Georgia fans feel that because they had a scoreless first quarter against Ball State, right? Like, that's just SEC fans being SEC fans. But I think the truth lies somewhere in between. And I don't know about you, but anytime that I see Coach Saban have one of those pressers to where he's calm, it's rational, he's not animated, he's not it's almost like he knows exactly what this team is, and they need to be coached up. They need to be loved up, and he's not upset. He just wants them to get better, as opposed to teams where he knew that they were going to whip somebody's ass, and then he gets upset if they don't end up executing correctly.
Yeah, two things. The only place I would have given Alabama an edge there might be on special teams. Unfortunately for Alabama, they had a better punter, and Alabama punted a lot, so you saw that. And I think Reichard's a better kicker than Auburn, but that's really close. I mean, Auburn missed field goal. Yeah. Reichard was spot on. So, yeah, I mean, to your point, but all of that said, Alabama took the lead to the fourth quarter. I mean,
you gave up 21 points in the fourth quarter. Like, this was the whole idea about, we heard, what's the famous saying? Make their ass quit.
Yep.
Right? Like, when I look at this and I go, that just didn't happen. And I went back and I started thinking about it. All right, when did we kind of see this kind of, the armor wasn't as shiny on Alabama? And I start going through it. It's like, was it a coordinator change? Was it this? Or was it that? And I start thinking about it. Well, when did Georgia get really good? All of a sudden, Scott Cochran was a part of that staff. And I don't know how much a part of that was the mentality, the fourth quarter program, the toughness, the physicality. But I think when you go back and look at it, the most important recruit that Kirby Smart ever landed was not a player. I think it was the coach and the mentality of Scott Cochran when he took him from Tuscaloosa to Athens.
Yeah, I mean, and there were a lot of people that panicked. I mean, Alabama has lost assistants and coordinators all the time. Yeah. I mean, and I would say that's kind of what you want, right? You want coaches that other coaches want. That means they've been successful. Or other schools want as their head coach. That means they've been successful.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I rarely did I see panic over a departing staff member like I saw over Scott Cochran. And Alabama they've changed their approach in that a couple times after Scott Cochran has left. So, you do wonder, is it the same? But I hear all the time how Alabama's got this massive offensive line. They're all over 350 pounds, and it's bigger than an NFL offensive line, but it's not winning. They're not winning their battles. I mean, Middle Tennessee's Middle Tennessee. They didn't win their battle Saturday night against Texas. Texas' defensive line dominated that game,
crushed them. I mean, and I mean, you go back and look at it. That was the weird part about this whole deal, is because I felt in the past, rarely do you have, and we brought this up the last couple of weeks in the Burnout, is that at SEC Media Days, we heard a lot of Alabama kind of bravado, right? Like J.C. Latham's like, hey, we're going to win the Joe Moore Award, and we're upset, and we're pissed off. We got a chip on our shoulder, and we want to go undefeated. Like, rarely do you hear that out of Alabama. It's very subdued, where, like, they don't even say anything, right? But this year I kind of stood up, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I started looking at what transpired over on Saturday night, where they got whooped by the Longhorns in the lines of scrimmage, and I'm like, was it false bravado? Was it like them trying to convince themselves? Because I never heard that from Alabama. So I don't know. It's things are rotten in the state of Denmark right now. And in Tuscaloosa, that is a weird spot to be. But then what does the rest of the SEC look like, right? I mean, we're talking about this storyline right there. I can't do it on the right here. Can we panic now?
Yep.
Who else looks and seems great right now in this conference? I mean, everybody outside of probably Georgia, who still has maybe kind of small question marks, is a big question mark this year.
Well, and that's the thing about Georgia, and we're about to talk about who you trust nationally, and Georgia would fall into that. If you approach it, which I know from us talking you do, like you're national champion, you're number one until you get beat, then you trust Georgia, right? But if you try to flush everything, if you really legitimately just try to say every season has a life of its own, I'm not going to pay attention to what Georgia's done the last 2 years. You look at what Georgia's done the first 2 weeks, and you're like, I don't know. I mean, They've played two nobodies, and they've been a little sloppy in the first half against those two nobodies.
Yeah, but then they also, I mean, like, and I hear it and I see it with my own eyes. But I mean, again, the amount of tweets that we were getting in studio when we were doing the first quarter of that game, which was hashtag fire Bobo and what's going on and bring Todd Monken back and his Kirby, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, bro, you sound exactly like Alabama fans did for the last decade. Okay. Like, relax. And then guess what? They put on 31 points and then it's no longer an issue. So, I think the idea of ripping Georgia and saying they don't look good because, hey, I think they've had vanilla offenses the first couple of weeks is like also complaining about like the gas mileage you get and, and how fuel efficient your Bentley is right now. Like you're fine. It's still 40-point victories back to back where you're kind of working on who you have. I mean, for them, they have an NFL roster and they have an NFL like preseason schedule until coming up this week and they face South Carolina.
All right, the Burnout presented each week by MyBookie.ag. Code next round when you sign up there at MyBookie.ag to get that sign-on bonus. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie.ag. Also, Roback brings you the show. Great apparel. Burnsy wears it. We wear it. We love Roback. TNR20 at checkout to save 20% on all the Roback gear. The pullovers are so soft. They're fantastic. The golf shirts are great. Great golf gear and hats and pullovers and hoodies and all of that at Roback. Roback.com. I like the quarter zips, too. I have a closet full of quarter zips.
They should Roback should sign an NIL deal with Texas A&M right now and says our hoodies are softer than A&M secondary. That should be the tagline, and that should be the NIL deal. Can you imagine? Like Roback just offers every single part of the A&M secondary. If you thought our hoodies were soft, watch this film. I mean, like, let's get creative on name, image, and likeness. Why does it have to be like we want you? Like,
that's right.
Offer them the deal. Why not?
Yeah, Roback.com, code TNR20 at checkout to save 20% on your first order. All right, let's move on. Who do you trust? Let's look at this globally. Let's talk.
Whoa. Wait, I know we got to get to that, but like
we don't have to do anything.
Okay, Jalen Milroe, how we feel?
Right.
We good?
Look, here's the thing. Jalen Milroe was starting his third game. It was against Texas, by far and away the best team he has played as a starter, or as a player. He came in relief against Arkansas. He started against Texas A&M. This Texas team, I think they're a legitimate. I have no problem. In fact, I'd have them ranked higher than 4. Okay. So he's starting his third game. And so you've got that. He's still an inexperienced starter. He's struggling to read the defenses. That's obvious. And a lot of times in that first half, he was one read and run. But okay, so that's all him. All right, now add to that the fact that his offensive line is not protecting him. He's got pass rushers coming from everywhere. His backs aren't particularly good at protecting their quarterback. So now you're not getting help from your backs stoning the blitzers, right?
Right.
He's got inexperienced wide receivers. He's
can't get separation.
That's right. He himself is inexperienced. And then you add to all that, he's got a center now that struggles to snap him the football. So it's like you've got all that on your plate, and now I'm nervous every time the snap comes because I don't know if it's going to get to me. Like how many times, when you got a center and quarterback that are in rhythm, you never want the quarterback to take the eye off the snap, but he knows it's going to be right there, right? Like I may not have to keep my eyes on it because I know it's going to hit me where it's supposed to hit me. Well, all of a sudden now, and do you remember us old guys remember a guy named Homer Smith, offensive coordinator? I don't know if you remember Homer Smith.
Yeah, I remember the name.
Yeah, he used to hate his quarterback. He liked his quarterbacks under center because his belief was the defense tips their hand most in about the second half of the play. And if you're in the shotgun, you miss that watching the ball come into your hands. The ball hits your hands, then you look up and you see the defense. So he liked his quarterback being under center so he could get the snap, and as he dropped back, he sees what the defense is doing. I always found that fascinating for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I hadn't heard that, but that makes a whole lot of sense. And now I go back and look at it too, is about like the demeanor of Saban every time that they would cut to, the directors, they know after a bad pass or after something, they're going to go on Saban because they're like, give me the Saban cam. Like, is he pissed? He's whatever. I never saw him flustered. And it was almost like, that's just kind of what we thought would happen. Like, teams don't believe that Milroe can make the reads or adjustments. And I'm sure Alabama knew that, right, going into it. And it's almost like he's resigned to the fact of like, listen, this is what's going to happen all season long. We got to find ways to get around it at some point. So I'm just kind of curious of how that plays. I mean, I know Saban was asked about it. He said, hey, I thought about making a change, but then, of course, Milroe comes out and scores. God rest the souls of South Florida Bulls this weekend, who have to deal with the brunt of, hell hath no fury like an Alabama team scorned, like
coming off a loss.
Literally. Oh my God. I mean, like that, like what LSU did to Grambling, it feels like what Bama's about to do to South Florida this week.
All right. Yeah. But we talked about this. So what do? I mean, like, do you get a good look at Buckner and Simpson against South Florida, or do you realize, okay, this could be a get right game to get Jalen's mind back right, get him some time, where he's not constantly under pressure to try to build some rhythm with these receivers before you move into conference play? I mean, how do you play that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just I don't know enough about the mental makeup of these quarterbacks, right? Or whoever it is, I don't know. Like we saw when Anthony Richardson struggled at Florida, sometimes mentally he would come out in the post-game press conference and say, "Man, I didn't have it. I let everybody down," and you could tell by his body language. I remember, seeing clips of Jalen Milroe post-game, and he couldn't have been more buttoned up. Answered every question like as cool of a cat as possible. So, I think that's more of like for Alabama to look at and go, hey, listen, if we go ahead and give other guys a look, are we going to lose Milroe? I don't think that's the case. Like from all accounts, Milroe is like a mentally, physically strong guy who just doesn't have the grasp with his offense quite yet, which is, I mean, listen, no fault. It's hard to be a quarterback, and especially at that level, especially after what Alabama has done over the last couple of seasons. So I would go give somebody else a look. If for no other reason, then hey, listen, if I hit the 3-wood and I shank it out or I rope hook it, okay, I can't use that club, right? Let's just go back to the driver. Like, let's go back to Jalen Milroe as QB.
Yeah, I will say this. If you want to reference back to 2015, when they played Ole Miss, they started Cooper Bateman, Alabama did, in that game instead of Coker, and they realized in that game, okay, we screwed this up. They go back to Coker. He finishes the season with a national championship. And having talked to Coker, he's part of our team here now. He does some shows with us. And he was like, that when I went back as the starter, I realized, okay, this is my team. I cannot let them down. They're wholly dependent on me. It's no shot at Cooper Bateman. Yeah. But it just told him they're not going to pull me again because it didn't work the first time, right? So you never know if you're Milroe, like if Simpson or Lonergan or Buckner or whoever gets a bunch of snaps at South Florida and that doesn't work, then maybe that is him saying, okay, this is my team now. Mm-hmm. They're wholly dependent on me. There is nothing behind me that's going to work. I have to make this work. You just never know. I mean, like you said, it's a mental game. You don't know.
And they'll know it better. I mean, the last thing on the Bama deal is that, everybody wants to, laugh at it. And I understand because Bama had been the gold standard up until last year of college football when that now resides in Athens. But like people kind of dancing on the grave of Alabama football is like, I still don't see them losing 2 games this season. I think that they have enough talent to go in at 11-1. Now that may say more about the SEC not being as strong. And the other thing too is like the dynasty and the legend of Nick Saban and Alabama football is not over until people stop caring about beating Alabama. Like nobody cared that Duke beat Clemson, right? Like it was like, oh yeah, man, look at that. Okay, it wasn't celebrated. It wasn't like talked about on the front part of SportsCenter. It was like, all right, Dabo's struggling right now. Like that's the end of a dynasty. Like they were celebrating in Austin, like jumping into the fountains and chanting SEC. Yeah. Like until it's no longer a big deal to beat Alabama, you're still a dynasty member.
Yeah, and the celebration inside Ryan Daniel was like they had just won the conference. I mean, and I don't blame them. That was a massive win for them. I mean, Lance made the point in the show today, and this is crazy to think about. If Sark loses if Texas loses that game, I think Sark's overall record at Texas is 15-14. If he loses that game, he's a 500 coach. Now he's still a 500 coach, roughly. Yeah. But he's got to win in Tuscaloosa, and it just changes the whole outlook now, right?
Well, I mean, ask Jimbo Fisher that, right? Yep. If Jimbo doesn't go and beat Alabama a couple of years ago, I mean, what ends up happening? Yep. I don't know. I mean, and of course, being 500 in college football is good. You might get you a contract extension if you ask Jimbo. Like that worked out pretty well for Jimbo Fisher on that deal.
He's fine either way. Don't forget Alabama, about a 31-point favorite to open up down at South Florida. Lance'sLock.com has all those plays every single weekend of college football. In fact, throughout the week. Monday Night Football, Thursday Night Football, all the Saturday and Sunday games right there at Lance'sLock.com. They've got daily packages, weekly packages, monthly packages, full season packages, and it is well worth your time. Lance'sLock.com, another winning football weekend he's coming off of, and he'll give you another one next weekend at Lance'sLock.com. All right, so who do you trust? We just talked about Alabama. It may still be Alabama. So when you look in the top 10 and you see Georgia and Michigan and Texas and Florida State and Ohio State and Alabama is still there, who do you trust? Who do you trust, Ashley?
I mean, I still, obviously, because of the way the defense has looked, and yes, I mean, Carson Beck has not looked great world beater wise, but they didn't ask him to be a world beater yet. I still trust Georgia as, you know, as the heavy favorite right now in the SEC. The thing is, I really haven't seen Ohio State been pressed anybody. Michigan hasn't played, anybody really.
Nope.
I mean, Texas and Florida State, I mean, have given us by far the two best performances, and they earned that. That wasn't fluke wins. That was beating an SEC team's ass. And so I trust them at that point. You can only go with what your eyes have told you. The problem is, even with Ole Miss beating Tulane, you know, when you're down 17-7, and I know Lane's called Tulane an SEC team, right? I mean, technically they were back in the day.
Yes, I mean, for Lane's great-grandparents, they were. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but, you know, still that doesn't feel like there was enough of kind of angst early in that game when they were down 17-7. I mean, they poured it on, finished the game, outscoring them 30-3. But that didn't feel like there was enough issues there where I still like Alabama over Ole Miss coming up in a couple of weeks. And I saw Tennessee kind of play with their food against Austin Peay. Like the downfield passing attack for Joe Milton and the Vols just hasn't connected quite yet. So I don't trust anybody right now, right? I mean, it's like one of these murder mystery theater dinners that you go and you're like, I have no freaking clue here in the first 45 minutes, like who did it? Like no clue.
And see, that's the thing. Like if you're one of these fan bases, if you're an LSU fan or you're an Alabama fan and you're like, oh my gosh, we've already lost a game. We're not even through week 2. I thought we were going to contend for the national championship. And you start scanning the landscape and you're like, yeah, a lot of people got warts now, man. I mean, this is far from a issue. And here's what I think it is. Alabama has lost. Clemson has lost. They're out of the top 25. Ohio State has looked really, really human, especially at the quarterback spot. I mean, those are 3 teams. Georgia is also in this mix, but they're winning. Those are 3 teams over the last 5, 6, 7 years you could absolutely depend on. Right. They've all, either lost or looked really, really shaky in wins. So the natural thing now is to start saying, I really don't know who I can trust. I guess I can still trust Georgia. They're there. Maybe Michigan has earned my trust, though those 2 teams have not really been tested yet. But I'm not even sure if I could still trust Texas or Florida State or Washington or USC or any of those teams.
Well, you know what it sounds like? It almost sounds like how we've looked at the NFL over the last 20 years, right? Like Roger Goodell and the way that free agency works and the salary cap has built the league whose biggest feature is everybody's got a chance. Any given Sunday, anything can happen, right? And a lot of that has to do with players swapping places, right? Free agency. We've got that in college football now between name, image, likeness, and the transfer portal. So I wonder how much of that is, hey, listen, do you want to be a third stringer over at Alabama and wait your turn? Or do you want to come play immediately at Duke? Or do you want to come play immediately here where we have a need? Like I think part of that, and I don't think it's a lot, but I think that, if all of a sudden 10 to 12% of your roster filters down to other places, that's going to hurt you. And I don't know. I think that's early returns to figure out if that's what the issue is right now. But it seems to be affecting everybody right now outside of Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, I really think it is. But, I mean, it is just so interesting when you watch these games and watch massive contributors like Adonai Mitchell for Texas. I mean, the former Georgia receiver who's owned Alabama at times. There he is having another big game against Alabama. And you're like, 3 or 4 years ago, that kid, he's sitting out this year, right? He's not even eligible for them.
Yeah. And he can play. I mean, Bear Alexander was on the defensive line. I mean, he practically almost was a starter on that D line last year, and now he goes to USC and he plays extremely well. So again, I think some of that player movement goes on. Now, as far as the trust and can we panic, I want to last thing on this, like what's happening at A&M is borderline unacceptable, Brownie, and I just can't. And I mean, I guess it's my fault for thinking it's going to be different. It's kind of like I keep telling my kid that, hey, I think today's the day he's going to be potty trained and he's going to poop on the potty, and then he continues to just poop in his diaper. Like, that's on me for actually believing that things have changed. And I mean, you got all the facilities, you got all the recruits, you've got the NIL laws, you've got the recruiting rankings, like all of it. You got your new offensive coordinator, you got a great stadium, all of it. And yet we're still at square one. Like, is A&M any better under Jimbo Fisher than they were with Kevin Sumlin? I don't know if I can answer that question in yet 6 years down the road.
Yeah, the record says they're not. I mean, I think if you look at their record at this point in each tenure, I think Sumlin is still tracking in front of him. And I mean, the record just says no, that it is not a better situation now than it was under Kevin Sumlin. And I mean, it's trending down. I don't know what to make of that game Saturday at Miami. I know they were completely outclassed, especially in the second half. I think the number is Miami closed that game on like a 41-16 run or something like that. And that doesn't even compute.
Yeah, I mean, the secondary was atrocious. I mean, I thought Connor Wegman was okay, but there was just no explosive plays. And again, like and it's not so necessarily it's Miami, but in the fact of it's kind of like a 65% full stadium. It's Cristobal, like getting guys in and then punking you. Like, I don't get it whatsoever. And again, we keep going back to it, but had you been in a different situation, the contract extension for Jimbo Fisher continues to be one of the most puzzling decisions that has been made throughout college football outside of the Mel Tucker, contract, which is a whole different ball of wax, of like, why did you put yourself in this position? And yet, I mean, that's what you're going to have to deal with, and for the near future at least.
Weren't they both LSU related? I know Jimbo, he leveraged the LSU opening to get his deal, or the fear of an LSU opening. And I think Mel Tucker pretty much did the same thing, right? Is that like, hey, look, if Ed Orgeron is fired, I've coached there before. I've got I'm the obvious guy. So I think LSU's opening.
Jimmy Sexton is undefeated. I mean, like, there's lawyers and there's Jimmy Sexton, and those are the only two people that have never probably lost anything in their whole life. Those two.
There's no doubt. I mean, this whole Texas A&M thing is wild, though, and you're right. It's like, it's going to be difficult for me to put this in words, but when you watch a Miami game, and I am a Miami Dolphins fan, obviously, right? They're playing in my team stadium, but that's a pro team. And I watch a Miami game, and Miami's band is like this 100-piece band, and they're spread out in the individual seats, and it just doesn't. It looks like so low rent. And then they show the stands, and they're maybe 60% full for an SEC team. They had buy one, get one tickets to get into that game. You bought that ticket. You got a ticket for like the Georgia Tech game later this year. It's like you're losing to a low-rent program, and maybe Cristobal is building them back up. But it's the restaurant that used to be the best restaurant in town, and now it's just all run down, and it gets a bad health rating. And that's who you're losing to. And I'm like, we're the high-end restaurant. We're the steakhouse, man. We're the ones that we've built the new steakhouse. We serve with the finest silver. We've got the best tablecloths and napkins. We should be the dominant restaurant, and we just lost to an almost out of business Denny's. I mean, what's going on?
A Shoney's, like Shoney's, they're still around in the South. So I mean, I started doing the math, and I'm like, if the contract extension didn't happen in College Station, right, this would be like year 6 or 7 under Jimbo at $7.5 million a year, because that's basically what it was. Like, you're looking at like a high 20s, $30 million buyout if you decided to go that route. I'm not saying that they need to fire him. I'm just saying it would have been a feasible option at that point. Now you're looking at it that, for no apparent reason, that you put yourself in a situation where you would owe like $75 million or $80 million if you try to get out of that contract. So, and how much onus does that put on Jimbo Fisher? If I know, hey man, doesn't matter what you do, I'm gonna get my bag, I'm gonna get paid. Like, is there onus? I think there is, because he's a competitive guy, but at a certain point, like, things that look like they're going to make sense on paper, i.e. Scott Frost in Nebraska, just don't plan out.
Well, and the weird thing is, it looks like maybe although Wegman, wasn't fantastic. It didn't travel as well as it was at Kyle Field against New Mexico. Mm-hmm. But when it looks like they've got their offense straightened out a little bit, and they finally have found some rhythm with Bobby Petrino there, now all of a sudden is the defense falling apart? I mean, it kind of takes us back to, topic number one, can we panic now? If I am a fan of Texas A&M, am I panicked about DJ Durkin's defense because they got completely worked by Miami?
Yeah. I just don't think A&M fans feel panic any longer. They're resigned. If that makes any sense to me. I think A&M fans sit there and just go, I'm almost apathetic to what is happening. Like Bama fans are pissed today. Even Georgia fans, even though they're undefeated, they're upset because they don't think the offense is good. LSU fans are upset about what happened against FSU. I think A&M fans, it's almost like bro, I just got to walk away. I just got I need a sports walk right now because it's tough.
Once apathy sets in, it's all over with. MyBookie.ag brings you the Burnout. MyBookie.ag code next round when you sign up to get that sign-on bonus. Also, that for a limited time, a casino chip there in the MyBookie Casino next round gets you all of that. You can use it, and if you win, it is yours and yours forever. Just bet it one time, that sign-on bonus, and it becomes yours forever. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere. MyBookie.ag code next round. That is MyBookie.ag code next round. All right, as we look ahead, it is not a great week of college football. I mean, it is hard to find the nuggets in this week of college football. But one that I find really interesting is Florida playing host to Tennessee. And growing up, when I was a teenager, this was the most meaningful SEC game for a very, very long time. It became Alabama LSU. But before Alabama LSU, for all you youngs out there, Florida Tennessee was it. And this was such a critical game that you couldn't lose to get back in the national championship. And they used to play it like week 3 every year. And the loser would just be done with their national championship pursuit. Well, here we go. It is week 3 again. It is not quite do or die, but Tennessee is at Florida, 6 o'clock ESPN. This feels like a massive moment for Billy Napier. You had a rough year one. You have a rough opener against Utah. If you lose to Tennessee, it could snowball on you for Napier. Maybe not cost him his job, but he's going to hear a lot about it. But if you could get this win, this is a top 15 win. You're beating a rival, and maybe it feels like the worms turned a little bit for him.
And more importantly, it's a situation where Tennessee, I don't think, has won in Gainesville in 20 years. I think it's
twice since 1970. I think it's twice since 1970. Yeah.
I'm looking at it right now. They've met every single year since 1990. Tennessee won 38-33 last season for just the second win in the past 18 meetings, but they're looking for its first win since 2003 in Gainesville, right? I mean, that's crazy. And that's one of those deals where if you're a Florida fan, you're right. There's a lot of opportunity. I don't even want to call it pressure, but there's more of an opportunity for Billy Napier to be like, listen, I know things aren't great. Hang tight. The cavalry's coming. We got good recruiting classes. And guess what? Death taxes in Tennessee still doesn't beat us here in the swamp, right? But you lose that game. And even worse, if all of a sudden, which I think could potentially happen, if Tennessee comes in there and it's a 34-14 type game, and the offense looks stagnant, and they run the ball really well, which I think Tennessee can actually do. I think Tennessee is more of a rushing team than they are a throwing team this year. Then, buddy, that's tough to swallow if you're leaving the swamp and it ends up being a double-digit victory. I was kind of surprised. I mean, I'm sure my bookie has it, but what do you think the line of that game was? If you already haven't looked at it?
I saw, it's kind of weird. I saw Circa Sports is one of the first point spreads I see. They had it at 4. It opened at Tennessee favored 4. I checked earlier. MyBookie.ag, I think, has it at 7 right now. Lance told me he thought he had seen it as high as 9.5. So it seems like it's all over the board. But MyBookie.ag had it at 7. So Tennessee, a touchdown favorite going in there.
Yeah, and I mean, my first knee-jerk reaction was that I thought the line would come in at like 10.5, maybe even more for Tennessee. And it depends. I haven't seen any of the injuries and injury kind of reports or, over the last couple of hours or so. But, I mean, this is a monster thing. I mean, Tennessee looks different. Tennessee, the passing attack, it's not, I don't think necessarily Milton as far as him being, inaccurate because, the arm strength is already there. But it's just like they're not putting him in a position the same way that they trusted Hendon Hooker to be in that position. Now, how much are you going to show against Austin P? I have no idea. But I still think that Tennessee wins that game by I think 2 touchdowns, frankly.
Ooh, that's a tough night for I said Napier's big night is what it says right. That is a tough night for Billy Napier if that happens. But it's kind of they're the reverse of Texas. So Texas week 1 plays Rice, and everybody's like, "Ugh, did you see Texas against Rice?"
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they couldn't do anything. And then you watch Texas at Alabama, and you're like, "Yeah, Sark was thinking ahead there. He was showing nothing against Rice." Yeah. And Tennessee, against Virginia, I watched and I'm like, okay, all right, they're not going to miss a ton without Hendon Hooker. It is, like you said, it's maybe a little different offense, but they still had some pop against Virginia. And then, as you said earlier, against Austin Peay, they did not look good. They only won that game by 17. They only scored 30 points on Austin Peay. And you wonder how much of that was Josh Heupel saying, all right, we're going to just go out there. We're not going to get anybody hurt. We're going to go through the motions. We're going to get past this game. We know what we've got.
I think it's a vanilla play call. I also think too, I mean, I wasn't enthused to watch Tennessee Austin Peay. Like I'm as a fan, and I love college football, right? And so I sit there and I go, how much, if you're a Tennessee fan, are you like, God, I cannot wait to play against Tennessee? Does it have the same amount of your interest? And I know listen, all football players are going to be locked in. You have to be, right? You're competitive, but I still don't think you're on razor's edge the way they will be coming up this weekend against Florida. And I just want to see it. I would love to see what that crowd looks like when they do the Tom Petty thing at the start of the fourth quarter, right? Are there going to be empty seats, or is this place going to be rocking? Because, like you said, as teenagers and kids growing up, man, this freaking rivalry was every bit as good as Bama, LSU, or Georgia, Florida, any of this stuff.
Yeah, I think I remember it. I couldn't remember this wrong, but I think you're going to correct up at this. This was the first game, not the first game I ever watched at 4K, I don't think. Or high def, not 4K, but high def. But I remember I was in a store somewhere, and they were playing. I don't know why I wasn't home. I'm trying to remember why I wasn't at home watching this on my standard definition TV. But this game was on, and it was a CBS primetime game. And it was in high def and it was the first time I was like, wow, that looks amazing. And it was just, I felt like I was at the game. And I remember CBS had it prime time. I'm like, okay, so CBS could show games at night. Interesting. Yeah. All right. That's a cool development. We'll get some SEC night games.
It made me throw up in my mouth last week when I heard CBS using the CBS college football intro. Dun, 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 and it was like Rutgers versus Illinois. And I was like,
yes, let's have some respect for that great song. I mean, it is a great song. Let's don't water it down with Rutgers and Northwestern, please.
I talked to ESPN execs a while back, and I was like, can we offer a trade? Literally, what can we do? But listen, it was CBS. I'm Pavlovian when it comes to that song, and it sucks that it's going to be a part of the Big Ten now.
I agree, because it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. I did think it was interesting near the Bama-Texas game how much of a new era in SEC football starts next year. I mean, that was a heavy promo at the early part of that game for the ESPN SEC merger heading forward. Yeah.
I joked around about it on Twitter, just trying to have a little bit of fun because nobody understands sarcasm on Twitter. I go,
they don't.
Listen, we all understand that Bama let Texas win that game, right? Fully, follow the money, people. This was about Alabama letting Texas win, so they get more television revenue next year because Alabama can still make the college football playoff and be in the SEC championship game if they win out. This was Saban helping out Sark and all this stuff, and it's amazing how many people got in my Twitter mentions going, you really think that happened? I was like, oh, dear Lord. This is the greatest IQ test of all time.
So I've heard people, because I'm with you. Sarcasm is my love language. So, I try to use it on Twitter, and people just don't get it. People are like, you need a sarcasm font. And I'm like, no. I want to reward people that understand it. I don't want to dumb it down.
No, I was like, was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? No, it absolutely wasn't. It wasn't the Germans. I was like, oh, Lord. Okay.
Yes. Watch a movie every now and then. The Burnout presented by MyBookie.ag. Code next round when you go to MyBookie.ag. Get that sign-on bonus, and for a limited time, a chip for the MyBookie casino. MyBookie.ag. Code next round. MyBookie.ag. Code next round. All right, let's wrap it up with talking about the SEC West, which seems about as wide open as ever. I thought about us doing a power ranking. That's going to get too convoluted and complicated. So let's just run through it and just get a quick thought on where you think these teams are heading. We've talked a lot about Alabama. I think we've got to fill there. Let's do this alphabetically. Auburn, they're 2-0, but that was about as ugly a win as you're going to get, the win at Cal.
Yeah, it was literally survive in advance. It was, when you don't have your golf game and you're just trying to break 80, you're like, okay, I got it underneath 80. That was all it is. And that's why I expect there's going to be a lot of growing pains. But I will tell you this, I think it was a really important win to have one of those like ugly, grinded out, I don't know how the hell we won those games, moments when it's on a road trip. Right. Yeah. If it happens at home, I don't think you get the same thing. But like when you're exhausted, it's 4 a.m. You're looking at each other like, holy hell, it's like getting caught out in a shootout and somehow you're like, how did we survive that? Right. And like and like in the movies and you're like, oh, man, I can't believe that. And it's like a bonding experience. So I still think that Auburn ultimately might end up being the worst team in the SEC West. But I still think that obviously we just showed that, they're still pretty good. It's just I think the rest of the SEC West is a little bit ahead of them right now.
I said alphabetically. I'm showing off my Jacksonville State education because I jumped Auburn in front of Arkansas. So let's talk Arkansas. They get a big challenge. They get a big challenge against BYU. Well, I say a big challenge against BYU. BYU has been they struggled a little bit against Sam Houston State. They played Southern Utah, which I don't know what you learned from that. We haven't seen Arkansas get challenged yet. Yeah. This is a really interesting game, head-to-head with that Florida-Tennessee game, 6:30 ESPN2. I do think we'll know more about Arkansas after this one because BYU, it's kind of a brand. It's Kalani Sitake likes to play a physical style of football. This was a good game last year. We'll learn Arkansas this week. I think we'll know a little bit about Sam Pittman's group.
Yeah, the problem is I don't think we'll see Rocket Sanders again. This will be 2 weeks in a row that he's gone, not going to be available to play. And that's the troubling aspect of it. And so it feels like it needs to be a KJ Jefferson takeover game, which he's fully aware or fully capable of doing. But again, I can't look at Arkansas in the same light as an Alabama or even an LSU right now until I see Rocket Sanders, be 100% healthy. Not just play, but I'm talking about like be the difference maker because I think he's him and KJ are the most dynamic duo in college football when they're healthy.
All right, let's talk about the Mississippis. We'll start with Ole Miss. You referenced that game earlier. That final score, it was a crazy end-of-game sequence for them. That covers up that was a really tight game at Tulane. Now, our Ole Miss fans will say, wait a minute, that was a top 25 Tulane team. It was also a Tulane team starting their backup quarterback. Right. And Ole Miss struggled to run the football, which drives Lane Kiffin crazy because he's one of the best run game coaches in America.
Yeah, and that was the issue. Like when they started leaning on him a little bit late, you felt like, okay, this is more of an SEC roster wearing down Tulane. But again, the fact that they couldn't do it right off the bat, and I think a lot of it has to do with Trey Harris. Trey Harris has become their Laquan Treadwell, right? Their AJ Brown, like their dude. And when he had that early touchdown pass, but then got injured, he didn't return because I think it was cautionary. Like he's kind of the engine that makes Quinshawn and the rest of that rushing attack go. Like they struggled until they could find somebody else. So I still think that they're in pretty good shape. And Jackson Dart showed to me like so much damn moxie in that game. Like 4th and 4, they needed a play, and he kept answering the bell. So I've been really impressed for how he's progressed since spring, honestly.
It was on your network. You were in studio there. State playing Arizona.
Weird game.
Yeah, it was a very strange game because you get the win in overtime. They never could put away Arizona and Jaden DeLara, the Arizona quarterback, who's a really talented player. But I tell you what worries me about if I'm a State fan, you're +5 in turnovers and still have to go overtime to win that game. I know it's a win, and I'm going to celebrate a win anytime. But then I look at it and I'm like, boy, if we're +5 in turnovers against Arizona, we really don't need to be in overtime.
Yeah, and I think they're still trying to find out their identity with Barbe's offense, right? I mean, you see Will Rogers, would only attempted, I think, like 17 or 18 passes. So I don't still think they have the personnel to fully go to the offense that they want to right now. So it's almost like a transition year. But again, I like Zach Arnett, man. I don't know if you heard him, dropping the F-bomb.
Oh, I did. Yes.
Afterwards. Yes. And it just, like you pull for guys in sports, and I don't have any vested interest in State or vested interest in Zach Arnett as a person. I don't really know him and his background, coming from New Mexico. But like, I look at him and I'm like, okay, I like this guy because it feels like one of us gets an opportunity to be a head coach, and he's going after it. So he's
the everyman, right?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, really, really interesting game for State and LSU. It's LSU's first. They play Grambling. You're not going to learn a ton from that. It's really their first big test since Florida State. That's an 11 o'clock ESPN game, straight out of game day. So I think you're going to learn a lot about both teams in that one. Early matchup at the Southeastern Conference, but I think it's fascinating when they're in Starkville.
Yeah, I think it helps LSU that it's a 11 a.m. kickoff as opposed to a mid-afternoon or a night game. I mean, just listen, the cowbells will ring, but it's just something different over at Davis Wade over at night. I like this kid Logan Diggs, the running back that for that LSU. He showed some glimpses. He wasn't available in week 1. Mason Smith back. I think that the Harold Perkins turning him into a linebacker experiment is all but done, and so I think now I'm hoping.
Yeah.
But I think for the second straight week, they're like, let's just see what we have here. And at some point, you got to let the Ferrari fly. And I think that's going to be a big change that we'll see coming up for LSU's defense.
If I were holding your family hostage and you had to correctly predict either the eventual West winner or the team that finished last in the West to release your family from bondage, which one do you think you would go with right now? Do you think you'd try to pick the winner or the team that finished dead last?
I would probably pick the team that would finish dead last. And I'm going to say that's Auburn. And no offense to Auburn, but I just think that I just don't see Peyton Thorne being that dude. And then outside of what's a kid? Eugene Asante.
Asante. He played an amazing game, didn't he?
Yeah, I just don't think they have those playmakers that I think that they'll struggle. But I'm still pretty confident that Alabama wins the West. I mean, they look the part in a bunch of different ways that, frankly, I didn't see from LSU even against Florida State. So, and then A&M is just who the hell knows? A&M is A&M.
All right, mybookie.ag code next round brings you the Burnout. Mybookie.ag code next round. Get that sign-on bonus when you sign up. Also for a limited time, a chip you could use in the MyBookie casino. Make sure you use code next round, though. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with mybookie.ag code next round. Also, lanceslock.com for all the plays coming off another winning weekend in football. He'll continue that with Monday night games, Thursday night games, all the weekend football, daily, weekly, monthly, season long packages right now at lanceslock.com. And also thank you to roback.com. TNR20 for 20% off your initial order there at roback.com. All right, Burns, you have another good week of football. We'll see you next Monday.
See you, buddy.